Good evening, and thank you for joining me for another Boring Books for Bedtime. I hope tonight's selection provides all the boredom your busy brain needs to quiet down and let you get some sleep. Before we begin, I'd like to give a special shout out of thanks to some new members of our Patreon family: Dorian, Amy, Sav, Susan, Tara, Lana, Abby, and Melissa. Thank you all so much for supporting this podcast. By becoming members of Patreon, you help us remain 100% listener supported and ad-free for everyone, and it's very much appreciated. And because you joined in the month of December, you and everyone else who supports us on Patreon or through a one-time tip, no subscription required, on buymeacoffee.com will be entered into our end-of-the-year holiday giveaway, which has several wonderful prizes, including some books our listeners will recognize, exclusive swag, and a special gift set I brought back from a recent travel to Japan. All things I think you'll enjoy. If you're interested in supporting Boring Books for Bedtime and being entered into that giveaway, you'll find links to Patreon and buymeacoffee.com in the show description. Now, let's read and relax. Find a comfortable spot. Adjust your volume. Take a nice deep breath in. Let it out slowly. And off we go. Tonight, let's relax with the words of two different naturalists, John Muir and Henry David Thoreau, as they ponder the winter season on the West Coast and the East Coast of the United States. Let's begin. Lake Tahoe in Winter by John Muir, first published in Sierra Club Bulletin in May 1900 as a reprint of a letter published in the San Francisco Bulletin 1878. The winter glory of the Sierra. How little is known of it. Californians admire descriptions of the Swiss Alps, reading with breathless interest how ice and snow load their sublime heights, and booming avalanches sweep in glorious array through their crowded forests, while our own icy, snow-laden mountains, with their unrivaled forests, loom unnoticed along our eastern horizon. True, only mountaineers may penetrate their snow-block fastnesses to behold them in all their white, wild grandeur. But to every healthy man and woman, and even to children, many of the subalpine valleys and lake basins, 6,000 or 7,000 feet above the sea, remain invitingly open and approachable all winter. With a friend and his two little sons, I have just returned from a week of bracing weathering around Lake Tahoe, in which we enjoyed glorious views of winter, fine rolling and sliding in the snow, swimming in the icy lake, and lusty reviving exercise on snowshoes that kept our pulses dancing right merrily. All the weather was hearty and exhilarating, though varying almost from hour to hour. Snowing, blowing, clear and cloudy, but never rigorously cold. This winter has been remarkably mild, the mercury having seldom made a very near approach to zero, even during the coldest nights around the lake, while the average noonday temperature was considerably above the freezing point. The snow lies deep on the surrounding mountains and about the shores, solid white contrasting with the dark blue water of the lake, while the forests and canyons and the upper glacial fountain hollows are well filled, assuring abundance of summer water for the lakes and streams. According to the record kept by Mr. McKinney on the west shore of the lake, 8 miles above Tahoe City, at an elevation of 6,500 feet above sea level, the amount of snow measured as it fell was 22 feet and 4 inches for the season up to March 20th, with 4 inches of rain, while an inch or two more of rain and 2 or 3 feet of snow will probably fall before the full opening of spring. Last season, the snowfall, measured by the same observer at the same station, was only 9 feet and 7 inches, while the season before last it was no less than 47 feet and 6 inches. The fall about Yosemite Valley, according to my own observations, usually considerably exceeded this. The greater portion of the snow that loads the main summits of the range falls in small, crisp flakes and broken crystals, or when accompanied by strong winds and a low temperature, the crystals, instead of being locked together in tufted flakes, are driven against each other and broken into meal and fine dust, which darkens the sky like night. But down in the forested region, at about the elevation of Lake Tahoe, the greater portion comes gently to the ground, light and feathery, some of the flakes in mild weather being nearly an inch in diameter, and is evenly distributed and kept from drifting to any great extent by the shelter of the woods. Every tree is loaded with the fairy bloom, bending down the branches and hushing the singing of the elastic needles. When the storm is over and the sun shines, the dazzling snow at once begins to settle and shift and fall off the trees in miniature avalanches. Then the relieved branches spring up and shake themselves dry, and the whole green forest, fed and refreshed, waves and sings again, rejoicing. The snow on the ground settles also, and thaws and freezes until it becomes coarsely granulated ice, with all trace of its crystalline snow structure destroyed. This is the present condition of most of the snow on the range. From towards midnight until midday at this time of year, a man may walk firmly over the surface as if on ice, provided the preceding day has been warm and the night frosty. The forested region, up to an elevation of about 8,000 feet, is generally clear of snow towards the end of May or middle of June. But now, March 28th, the higher canyons are still heavily blocked, and the head tributaries of the rivers flow in dark tunnels beneath the icy mass. As warm summer advances, the roof of compacted snow falls in here and there, leaving magnificent arching bridges where it is strongest, over which one may safely ride a horse. All the upper streams are thus buried and bridged every winter, and are seldom completely open to the light before the end of June or middle of July. Notwithstanding 22 feet of snow has fallen here this season, so greatly has it been melted and compacted, the present average depth at a height of 7,500 feet does not exceed 7 feet. the drifts in exposed lake hollows, and along the lee sides of bald ridges above the timberline are often 50 feet or more in depth, and many of the latter are grandly adorned with over-curling cornices, beneath which pale blue light shimmers with ineffable beauty. But it is in the fountain cirques of the ancient glaciers, beneath the shadows of the highest peaks, that the heaviest and most enduring deposits are stored up. For there the lavish snowfall on the steep, converging slopes is shot down in avalanches during or after every storm, heaping snow on snow to a depth of 100 feet or even more at times. These treasured banks are never wholly melted, however hot the summer, but with the few lingering glaciers form perennial fountains for the highest tributaries of the rivers. Few even among Californians have any fair conception of the marvelous abundance of glacier lakes hidden in the fastnesses of our mountains. The snow in some of the glaciers make a telling show, even from the distant lowlands, but not a single stream is visible, nor a hollow where one might hope to find a lake. Nevertheless, wild rivers are falling and sounding in every canyon, and all their upper branches are fairly laden with lakes like orchard trees with fruit. They nestle in rocky nooks and hollows about all the high peaks and in the larger canyons, reflecting their stern, rugged beauty and giving charming animation to the bleakest and most forbidding landscapes. From the summit of Red Mountain, a day's journey to the east of Yosemite Valley, 42 may be seen within a radius of 8 or 10 miles. The whole number in the Sierra can hardly be less than 1,500, exclusive of the smaller gems, which are innumerable. Perhaps 2/3 of them lie on the west flank of the range, and all are restricted to the alpine and subalpine regions, those which once brightened the lower regions having long since vanished by the filling in of their basins. Lake Tahoe is king of them all, not only in size, but in the surpassing beauty of its shores and waters. It seems a kind of heaven to which the dead lakes of the lowlands had come with their best beauty spiritualized. It lies embosomed in mountains of moderate height, near the northern extremity of the high portion of the range, between the main axis and a spur that puts out on the east side from near the head of the Carson River. Though it is 21 miles long by 10 wide, and from about 1,500 to 1,600 feet deep, its basin was once occupied by a glacier, which filled it from the bottom to a point high above the present water level, and being lavishly fed by the snows of the encompassing mountains, crawled slowly, like a mighty river, over the north rim of the basin, crushing and grinding the lower mountains that lay in its way. And it was only at the end of the ice period that this noble lake, at least in anything like its present form, came into existence. Excepting the forests that have sprung up around its shores, the post-glacial changes that have taken place are scarcely appreciable. The sediments carried forward by the inflowing streams at the head of the lake have made a few square miles of meadowland, and the breaking through of a moraine dam in the canyon of the outlet has lowered the lake considerably, leaving shore benches and lines on the rocky promontories to mark the original level. With these comparatively unimportant exceptions, the lake itself and all its grandly sculptured, ice-scored, and moraine-streaked basin exist today in just about the condition they presented when first they came to the light towards the close of the glacial period. The destructive action of man in clearing away the forests has not as yet effected any very marked change in general views. Perhaps about 150 million feet of lumber for the Comstock mines has thus far been cut from the lake shores, but the business is being pushed so fervently from year to year, almost the entire basin must be stripped ere long of one of its most attractive features. One of the lumber companies at work here has contracted with mine owners to supply 36 million feet of lumber and 60,000 cords of wood this season. It is estimated that the Tahoe Basin still contains about 600 million feet of lumber available for the mines. In summer, the woods resound with the outlandish noise of loggers and choppers and screaming mills. Skiffs and steamboats skim the lovely blue water in work and play. And ever and anon, as you thread the groves along shore, you come upon groups of gay tourists sauntering about, gathering flowers, or resting luxuriously in the rosiny shade of the pines, some in easy picnic attire, others all ribbons and colors, glaring wildly amid the green leaves and frightening the wondering squirrels and birds. But winter brings rest. At sight of the first snowflake, pleasure seekers flee as from a plague. The axe leaves the woods, and the kind snow heals every scar. Contemplating the basin from any commanding hilltop, only pale curls of smoke seen at wide intervals betoken the existence of human dwellings. Like the bears, the few settlers that remain here are silently holed up. The snow covers their cabins as if they were boulders, and when approached only a narrow shoveled-out passage or tunnel is found leading to the door. Some of the more enterprising winter dwellers drift about in boats in calm weather, catching trout for the Carson market, for the lake, on account of its great depth, never freezes. They thus earn from $30 to $40 a month, and at the same time get rid of lonely dullness. A trapper may also be seen now and then, shuffling along the shore on long Norwegian snowshoes in pursuit of minks, fishers, and otters. In this letter, I intended only to say a good word for winter in the mountains, hoping to incite others to come and enjoy it, sketching our excursion to illustrate the ease and comfort with which such snowy winter rambles may be made. But I have written too much, I fear, about the snow to leave room for more than a thin outline. We went by rail to Carson, and from there set out by stage for Glenbrook. After ascending on wheels until we reached the snow line, the driver attached his 4 horses to a sled, hoping thus to cross the summit, which is less than 8,000 feet high, without much difficulty. But mild weather had softened the snow, and the unfortunate animals, after floundering and wallowing through a mile of it, lay down exhausted with their heels in the air, Then we made our way on foot over to the lake. Next day, on a small steam tug, we crossed the lake to McKinney's on the west shore, where we were at home. Here we spent a few health-giving, delightful days, rowing, bathing, racing at lightning speed on snowshoes down a mountainside back of the house, and slipping about through the solemn, silent woods. Only the eldest of my companions ventured with me on the steep slopes. This was his first experience on snowshoes, and the several descents he made were the most remarkable specimens of falling locomotion that I ever had the fortune to witness. In shooting down steep declivities, the long sled runner-like shoes have to be kept parallel with firmly braced limbs. My friend, however, heedless of advice, launched himself in wild abandon, bouncing and diving, his limbs and shoes in chaotic entanglement, now in the snow, now in the air, whirling over and over in giddy rolls and somersaults that would shame the most extravagant performances of a circus acrobat. How original and inimitable he was! Wonderfully refreshing and exhilarating his queer capers must have been, for on coming to rest, with his runaway members divorced and lost, he would quietly gather himself, pick out the snow from his neck and ears, and say with preternatural solemnity, "This, Muir, is the very poetry of motion." We also spent some rare evenings by the huge fire in McKinney's old cabin. The log walls are covered with trophies of the chase, for our host has been a great hunter in his day. 2 live pet coons were frolicking on the floor, while our grand old host smiled benignly and played with them, the firelight gleaming on his weathered face. How big he seems, thus brought into relief, and what a shadow he casts! The fragrant, rosiny fire is the very god of the home. No wonder the old nations, with their fresher instincts, had their fireside gods. At last, when a mild snowstorm was blowing, we rowed to the lower end of the lake and completed our excursion by slipping on snowshoes down the Truckee Canyon to the railroad. Winter Animals by Henry David Thoreau, first published as part of Walden in 1854. When the ponds were firmly frozen, they afforded not only new and shorter routes to many points, but new views from their surfaces of the familiar landscape around them. When I crossed Flint's Pond, after it was covered with snow, though I had often paddled about and skated over it, it was so unexpectedly wide and so strange that I could think of nothing but Baffin's Bay. The Lincoln Hills rose up around me at the extremity of a snowy plain in which I did not remember to have stood before, and the fishermen, at an indeterminable distance over the ice, moving slowly about with their wolfish dogs, passed for sealers or Eskimo, or in misty weather loomed like fabulous creatures, and I did not know whether they were giants or pygmies. I took this course when I went to lecture in Lincoln in the evening, traveling in no road and passing no house between my own hut and the lecture room. In Goose Pond, which lay in my way, a colony of muskrats dwelt, and raised their cabins high above the ice. though none could be seen abroad when I crossed it. Walden, being like the rest usually bare of snow, or with only shallow and interrupted drifts on it, was my yard where I could walk freely when the snow was nearly 2 feet deep on a level elsewhere, and the villagers were confined to their streets. There, far from the village street, and except at very long intervals, from the jingle of sleigh bells, I slid and skated, as in a vast moose yard well trodden, overhung by oak woods and solemn pines, bent down with snow or bristling with icicles. For sounds in winter nights, and often in winter days, I heard the forlorn but melodious note of a hooting owl indefinitely far, such a sound as the frozen earth would yield if struck with a suitable plectrum, the very lingua vernacula of Walden wood, and quite familiar to me at last, though I never saw the bird while it was making it. I seldom open my door in a winter evening without hearing it. Hoo hoo hoo, hoo hoo, sounded sonorously, and the first 3 syllables accented somewhat like how to do, or sometimes hoo hoo only. One night in the beginning of winter, before the pond froze over about 9 o'clock, I was startled by the loud honking of a goose, and stepping to the door, heard the sound of their wings like a tempest in the woods as they flew low over my house. They passed over the pond toward Fairhaven, seemingly deterred from settling by my light, their commodore honking all the while with a regular beat. Suddenly an unmistakable cat-owl from very near me, with the most harsh and tremendous voice I ever heard from any inhabitant of the woods, responded at regular intervals to the goose, as if determined to expose and disgrace this intruder from Hudson's Bay by exhibiting a greater compass and volume of voice in a native, and boo-hoo him out of conquered horizon. What do you mean by alarming the citadel at this time of night, consecrated to me? Do you think I am ever caught napping at such an hour, and that I have not got lungs and a larynx as well as yourself? Boo-hoo, boo-hoo, boo-hoo. It was one of the most thrilling discords I ever heard. And yet, if you had a discriminating ear, there were in it the elements of a concord, such as these plains never saw nor heard. I also heard the whooping of the ice in the pond, my great bedfellow in that part of Concord, as if it were restless in its bed and would fain turn over, were troubled with flatulency and had dreams. Or I was waked by the cracking of the ground by the frost, as if someone had driven a team against my door, and in the morning would find a crack in the earth 1/4 of a mile long and 1/3 of an inch wide. Sometimes I heard the foxes as they ranged over the snow crust in moonlit nights, in search of a partridge or other game, barking raggedly and demoniacally like forest dogs, as if laboring with some anxiety, or seeking expression, struggling for light and to be dogs outright and run freely in the streets. For if we take the ages into our account, may there not be a civilization going on among brutes as well as men? They seem to me to be rudimental, burrowing men, still standing on their defense, awaiting their transformation. Sometimes one came near to my window, attracted by my light, barked a vulpine curse at me, and then retreated. Usually, the red squirrel, Sciurus hudsonius, waked me in the dawn, coursing over the roof and up and down the sides of the house, as if sent out of the woods for this purpose. In the course of the winter, I threw out half a bushel of ears of sweet corn, which had not got ripe, onto the snow crust by my door, and was amused by watching the motions of the various animals which were baited by it. In the twilight and the night, the rabbits came regularly and made a hearty meal. All day long the red squirrels came and went, and afforded me much entertainment by their maneuvers. One would approach at first warily through the shrub oaks, running over the snow crust by fits and starts, like a leaf blown by the wind. Now a few paces this way, with wonderful speed and waste of energy, making inconceivable haste with his trotters, as if it were for a wager. And now as many paces that way, but never getting on more than half a rod at a time. And then suddenly, pausing with a ludicrous expression and a gratuitous somerset, as if all the eyes in the universe were eyed on him. For all the motions of a squirrel, even in the most solitary recesses of the forest, imply spectators as much as those of a dancing girl, wasting more time in delay and circumspection than would have sufficed to walk the whole distance. I never saw one walk. And then suddenly, before you could say Jack Robinson, he would be in the top of a young pitch pine, winding up his clock and chiding all imaginary spectators, soliloquizing and talking to all the universe at the same time, for no reason that I could ever detect, or he himself was aware of, I suspect. At length he would reach the corn, and selecting a suitable ear, frisk about in the same uncertain trigonometrical way to the topmost stick of my wood pile before my window, where he looked me in the face, and there sit for hours, supplying himself with a new ear from time to time, nibbling at first voraciously and throwing the half-naked cobs about, till at length he grew more dainty still and played with his food, tasting only the inside of the kernel, and the ear, which was held balanced over the stick by one paw, slipped from his careless grasp and fell to the ground, when he would look over at it with a ludicrous expression of uncertainty, as if suspecting that it had life, with a mind not made up whether to get it again, or a new one, or be off. Now thinking of corn, then listening to hear what was in the wind. So the little impudent fellow would waste many an ear in a forenoon, till at last, seizing some longer and plumper one, considerably bigger than himself, and skillfully balancing it, he would set out with it to the woods, like a tiger with a buffalo, by the same zigzag course and frequent pauses, scratching along with it as if it were too heavy for him, and falling all the while, making its fall a diagonal between a perpendicular and horizontal, being determined to put it through at any rate. A singularly frivolous and whimsical fellow. And so he would get off with it to where he lived, perhaps carry it to the top of a pine tree 40 or 50 rods distant, and I would afterwards find the cobs strewn about the woods in various directions. At length the jays arrive, whose discordant screams were heard long before, as they were warily making their approach an eighth of a mile off, and in a stealthy and sneaking manner they flit from tree to tree, nearer and nearer, and pick up the kernels which the squirrels have dropped. Then, sitting on a pitch-pine bough, they attempt to swallow in their haste a kernel which is too big for their throats. And after great labor they disgorge it, and spend an hour in the endeavor to crack it by repeated blows with their bills. They were manifestly thieves, and I had not much respect for them. But the squirrels, though at first shy, went to work as if they were taking what was their own. Meanwhile, also came the chickadees in flocks, which, picking up the crumbs the squirrels had dropped, flew to the nearest twig, and placing them under their claws, hammered away at them with their little bills, as if it were an insect in the bark, till they were sufficiently reduced for their slender throats. A little flock of these titmice came daily to pick a dinner out of my wood pile, or the crumbs at my door, with faint, flitting, lisping notes, like the tinkling of icicles in the grass, or else with sprightly day, 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 or more rarely, in spring-like days, a wiry, summery Phoebe from the woodside. They were so familiar that at length one alighted on an armful of wood which I was carrying in, and pecked at the sticks without fear. I once had a sparrow alight upon my shoulder for a moment while I was hoeing in a village garden, and I felt that I was more distinguished by that circumstance than I should have been by any epaulet I could have worn. The squirrels also grew at last to be quite familiar, and occasionally stepped upon my shoe when that was the nearest way. When the ground was not yet quite covered, and again near the end of winter, when the snow was melted on my south hillside and about my woodpile, the partridges came out of the woods morning and evening to feed there. Whichever side you walk in the woods, the partridge bursts away on whirring wings, jarring the snow from the dry leaves and twigs on high, which comes sifting down in the sunbeams like golden dust. For this brave bird is not to be scared by winter. It is frequently covered up by drifts, and it is said, sometimes plunges from on wing into the soft snow, where it remains concealed for a day or two. I used to start them in the open land also, where they had come out of the woods at sunset to bud the wild apple trees. They will come regularly every evening to particular trees, where the cunning sportsman lies in wait for them, and the distant orchards next the woods suffer thus not a little. I am glad that the partridge gets fed at any rate. It is nature's own bird, which lives on buds and diet drink. In dark winter mornings, or in short winter afternoons, I sometimes heard a pack of hounds, threading all the woods with hounding cry and yelp, unable to resist the instinct of the chase, and the note of the hunting horn at intervals, proving that man was in the rear. The woods ring again, and yet no fox bursts forth on the open level of the pond, nor following pack pursuing their Actaeon. And perhaps at evening I see the hunters returning with a single brush trailing from their sleigh for a trophy, seeking their inn, They tell me that if the fox would remain in the bosom of the frozen earth, he would be safe. Or if he would run in a straight line away, no foxhound could overtake him. But having left his pursuers far behind, he stops to rest and listen till they come up. And when he runs, he circles round to his old haunts where the hunters await him. Sometimes, however, he will run upon a wall many rods, and then leap off far to one side, and he appears to know that water will not retain his scent. A hunter told me that he once saw a fox pursued by hounds burst out onto Walden when the ice was covered with shallow puddles, run part way across, and then return to the same shore. Ere long the hounds arrived, but here they lost the scent. Sometimes a pack hunting by themselves would pass my door and circle round my house, and yelp and hound without regarding me, as if afflicted by a species of madness, so that nothing could divert them from their pursuit. Thus they circle until they fall upon the recent trail of a fox, for a wise hound will forsake everything else for this. One day, a man came to my hut from Lexington to inquire after his hound that made a large track, and had been hunting for a week by himself. But I fear that he was not the wiser for all I told him, for every time I attempted to answer his questions, he interrupted me by asking, "What do you do here?" He had lost a dog, but found a man. One old hunter who has a dry tongue, who used to come to bathe in Walden once every year when the water was warmest, and at such times looked in upon me, told me that many years ago he took his gun one afternoon and went out for a cruise in Walden Wood. And as he walked the Wayland Road, he heard the cry of hounds approaching, and ere long a fox leaped the wall into the road, and as quick as thought leaped the other wall out of the road, and his swift bullet had not touched him. Some way behind came an old hound and her 3 pups in full pursuit, hunting on their own account, and disappeared again in the woods. Late in the afternoon, as he was resting in the thick woods south of Walden, he heard the voice of the hounds far over toward Fairhaven, still pursuing the fox. And on they came, their hounding cry, which made all the woods ring, sounding nearer and nearer, now from Well Meadow, now from the Baker farm. For a long time he stood still and listened to their music, so sweet to a hunter's ear, when suddenly the fox appeared, threading the solemn aisles with an easy coursing pace, whose sound was concealed by a sympathetic rustle of the leaves, swift and still, keeping the round, leaving his pursuers far behind. And leaping upon a rock amid the woods, he sat erect and listening with his back to the hunter. For a moment, compassion restrained the latter's arm, but that was a short-lived mood, and as quick as thought can follow thought, his piece was leveled. The hunter still kept his place and listened to the hounds. Still on they came, and now the near woods resounded through all their aisles with their demoniacal cry. At length the old hound burst into view with muzzle to the ground, and snapping the air as if possessed, and ran directly to the rock. But spying the dead fox, she suddenly ceased her hounding, as if struck dumb with amazement, and walked round and round him in silence, and one by one her pups arrived, and like their mother were sobered into silence by the mystery. Then the hunter came forward and stood in their midst, and the mystery was solved. They waited in silence while he took the fox, then followed the brush a while, and at length turned off into the woods again. That evening, a Weston squire came to the conquered hunter's cottage to inquire for his hounds, and told how for a week they had been hunting on their own account from Weston woods. The conquered hunter told him what he knew, and offered him the fox's skin, but the other declined it and departed. He did not find his hounds that night, but the next day learned that they had crossed the river and put up at a farmhouse for the night, whence having been well fed, they took their departure early in the morning. The hunter who told me this could remember one Sam Nutting, who used to hunt bears on Fairhaven ledges and exchange their skins for rum in Concord village, who told him even that he had seen a moose there. Nutting had a famous foxhound named Burgoyne. He pronounced it Bugine, which my informant used to borrow. The hunters were formerly a numerous and merry crew here. I remember well one gaunt Nimrod, who would catch up a leaf by the roadside and play a strain on it, wilder and more melodious, if my memory serves me, than any hunting horn. At midnight, when there was a moon, I sometimes met with hounds in my path prowling about the woods, which would skulk out of my way as if afraid, and stand silent amid the bushes till I had passed. Squirrels and wild mice disputed for my store of nuts. There were scores of pitch pines around my house, from 1 to 4 inches in diameter, which had been gnawed by mice the previous winter, a Norwegian winter for them, for the snow lay long and deep, and they were obliged to mix a large proportion of pine bark with their other diet. These trees were alive and apparently flourishing at midsummer, and many of them had grown a foot, though completely girdled. But after another winter such were without exception dead. It is remarkable that a single mouse should thus be allowed a whole pine tree for its dinner, gnawing round instead of up and down it. But perhaps it is necessary, in order to thin these trees, which are wont to grow up densely. The hares, Lepus americanus, were very familiar. One had her form under my house all winter, separated from me only by the flooring, and she startled me each morning by her hasty departure when I began to stir. Thump, 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 striking her head against the floor timbers in her hurry. They used to come round my door at dusk to nibble the potato parings which I had thrown out, and were so nearly the color of the ground that they could hardly be distinguished when still. Sometimes, in the twilight, I alternately lost and recovered sight of one sitting motionless under my window. When I opened my door in the evening, off they would go with a squeak and a bounce. Near at hand they only excited my pity. One evening, one sat by my door 2 paces from me, at first trembling with fear, yet unwilling to move. A poor wee thing, lean and bony, with ragged ears and sharp nose, scant tail and slender paws. It looked as if nature no longer contained the breed of nobler bloods, but stood on her last toes, Its large eyes appeared young and unhealthy, almost dropsical. I took a step, and lo, away it scud with an elastic spring over the snow crust, straightening its body and its limbs into graceful length, and soon put the forest between me and itself. Not without reason was its slenderness. Such then was its nature. Lepus, Levipes, Lightfoot, some think. What is a country without rabbits and partridges? They are among the most simple and indigenous animal products, ancient and venerable families known to antiquity as to modern times, of the very hue and substance of nature, nearest allied to leaves and to the ground and to one another. It is either winged or it is legged. It is hardly as if you had seen a wild creature when a rabbit or a partridge bursts away. Only a natural one, as much to be expected as rustling leaves. The partridge and the rabbit are still sure to thrive, like true natives of the soil, whatever revolutions occur. If the forest is cut off, the sprouts and bushes which spring up afford them concealment, and they become more numerous than ever. That must be a poor country indeed that does not support a hare. And with that, we have reached the end of Winter Animals, and these two seasonal readings from John Muir and Henry David Thoreau, which I hope you enjoyed. I'm afraid I only have a link to a free ebook of Walden from Project Gutenberg, but I'll leave that in the description for you. If you'd like to connect, suggest a boring book you'd like to hear read, or request more from one we've already started, you can drop me an email via our website, www.boringbookspod.com. It's always a pleasure to hear from you. Thank you so much for joining me for this evening's reading. Until our next boring book, good night.